Well, welcome and good afternoon. And this is NASDAQ's first webinar of the fiscal year. Person-centered planning is social justice. I'm Gail Cormier, the project director of NASDAQ, the Family Center of Excellence. Before we start on the presentation today, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. The recording, along with the PowerPoint presentation, slides, and any additional resources will be uploaded on our events page after the presentation, and we'll also send them to you. All attendees will be muted for the presentation portion of today's webinar. However, we still look forward to hearing your questions and we'll be happy to help you with any technical issues. To ask a question or request technical assistance, please send a message in the chat box. We'll be watching the chat during the entire presentation. If time allows, we will unmute you and you will have the opportunity to ask questions. You can also raise the hand button so we know when to call on you. When you leave this webinar, you will be redirected to complete a short feedback survey using the link provided. This survey will help us continuously improve our webinars, and it also fulfills our SAMHSA funding obligation to provide them with important data required by our contract. Please note, all information will be confidential and we will respect your privacy. We do not offer CEU credits for our webinars, but you will receive a certificate of attendance immediately after you fill out the survey. So when you leave here, you'll be taken for a survey, you'll fill it out, and then you'll get your certificate of attendance. I would like to thank SAMHSA for allowing us to share this information with you today. And again, thank you for joining us. Next slide, please. NASDAQ uses family-driven language. And as you can see, we're trauma responsive, strengths-based. We avoid blaming caregivers, one that's dear to my heart and all family members, I'm sure. We want to be inclusive. We use person-first language, respectful, non-judgmental, consistent with our actions. And if you want to learn more about language, you could go to the NASDAQ website under our products and pull out our documents on glossaries and language in our community. Next page, please. Now, it is my honor to turn this webinar over to our speakers today from the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems. And I will let them introduce themselves. Bevan, you're up.
Thank you, Gail. And hello to everyone. It's fantastic to see folks joining from all over the country. We're really glad to be here with you today. My name is Bevan Croft, and I am usually in Massachusetts, although today I'm in Eugene, Oregon, traveling for a conference. And I am the director of the behavioral health team at the Human Services Research Institute, or HSRI. HSRI is a nonprofit organization. We are nearing our 50th anniversary, and for our entire existence, we have worked with human services, and in my team, mental health and substance use service systems, to conduct research and evaluation and technical assistance to improve services that improve lives. And all of our work is guided by our values of that system should be person-centered. I'll tell you all about that as we go along. And also, we're guided by principles of social justice. So this webinar is a really near and dear to my heart as a person, as a researcher, and to my organization as well. The Human Services Research Institute runs a National Technical Assistance Center called NCAPPS. NCAPPS stands for the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems. And the QR code there on your screen will take you to a range of resources that we have available on our website. And we'll be kind of walking you through some of our seminal, one of our seminal resources today. So I'm pleased to be joined by two folks, two co-presenters today. And the first is Emily. Emily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much. I feel very excited to be a part of this and to share a little bit about my professional experience, but most importantly, my lived experience as a caregiver. So I am also at a conference this week. I am based out of Fargo, North Dakota, but I work for the Behavioral Health Division in the state of North Dakota as the lead family administrator. I am very new to the role. I am primarily a mom. I have 5 children. We became foster parents in 2014 and adopted a brother and sister who were 4 and 1 at the time. And then our first biological son was born at 29 weeks in August of 2016. So yes, that all happened in the same year. We quickly learned that our adopted kids had been exposed to high levels of alcohol and methamphetamine in utero. And so it's been a long journey to better understand how and why that was making such a huge impact on their brains and bodies and behavior. In 2021, we became foster parents for their younger brother and finalized our adoption of him in 2022. And then last year in 23, our rainbow baby made her way. And so now we have 5 children. As we navigate different stages in our kids' lives with them, we continue to learn, struggle, and hopefully continue to grow in compassion, knowledge, and practical skill development to best support their needs. So I am here today talking as a mom, but I also have that social work background. And I believe that the lived experience perspective is necessary at every level of systems work. Navigating a broken system on behalf of my kids has had its challenges, but I've also seen firsthand how impactful it can be. So that's just a brief intro. I'm excited to be in this space with everybody and share a little bit about our story. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Emily. We're so glad you're here. We have an additional colleague who will be joining us in a less traditional way. My colleague, Ebony Flint, had every intention to be here, but she had to schedule unexpectedly last week a medical procedure for this morning. So actually, I just got a text literally 30 seconds ago from Ebony telling me that the procedure went well and she is recovering. She really wanted to be here with you and has a lot to say, as you'll see. So we got creative. And last week, Ebony recorded videos with her remarks. So I will be, may the Zoom gremlins go easy on me. I will be sharing Ebony's videos throughout our presentation so that she can participate. As you'll see, she has a lot to add to the conversation. So Lachelle, I am going to, everyone cross your fingers. I'm going to try to share Ebony's first video so that she can introduce herself. Here we go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ebony Flint. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a policy analyst with the Human Services Research Institute, or HSRI. My background is as a certified peer specialist for 10 plus years and a trainer. And I identify as a Black woman, a mom to an autistic warrior, a creator of Brave Spaces, and I'm also a trauma survivor and a survivor of the psychiatric system. I'm glad to be here today to share some of my lived expertise and work experience with person-centered planning and systems. And I look forward to engaging with you all today.
Okay, I hope that went okay and everyone could hear. Awesome. Woo! All right, that's very exciting. Thanks so much, Lachelle. All right, and I am keeping track of. I'll do my best to keep track of some questions as they come in and chat. Gail will also kind of interrupt me if there are like clarifying questions as we go. And then we'll
Actually,
have
I'm going to interrupt you right now.
Well, I
but
saw it. I think I saw it, Gail, the first question.
About family-centered care?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I wanted to go ahead and address that if that sounds good. Sounds like we're on the same wavelength.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, so Dawn asked a really good question, which is, do you provide information on family-centered care in addition to person-centered care? Short answer to your question, Dawn, is yes. We are very much, we use the terminology person-centered, but NCAPPS, our mandate and our funding is that we provide and service a resource across disability categories, across human service categories, across the lifespan. So while you'll hear me use, and in the slides, you'll see the language person-centered throughout this presentation, I believe that that all of these concepts are sort of equally resonant and relevant to a family-centered orientation. And there may be points where there's difference, and we can discuss, and it's interesting, and we can learn and grow from that. But absolutely, and I will say NCAPPS's resources draw from the family-centered care literature, draw from approaches. Sort of across the lifespan. Our funding comes from the Administration for Community Living and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And we're really designed to be a resource for any entity that is providing services that are funded through Medicaid or through the Administration for Community Living, which funds older adults programs as well as programs for people with disabilities. So we kind of do everything. And I would posit that these principles apply to any human, regardless of age, always in the context of their family and their loved ones. So thanks for that question. A few sort of terminology pieces to go over as we jump in is when we talk about person-centered anything, we can think about thinking, planning, and practice. So person-centered thinking is a sort of set of values, and it's a way of thinking that shows up in the way that you act and the way that you speak and the types of work that you do. So it's foundational. And what's at the heart of that is people are and their loved ones are the experts in their lives, not professionals. People are the experts in their lives. Professionals are there to support the people, to support the families. And a person-centered thinking orientation has equal emphasis on quality of life and well-being as it does on an informed choice. So we're not only focused on like health and safety, which is traditionally the sense, sort of the what professionals in human service systems do. We're thinking about how do we balance health and safety with quality of life and well-being. And we'll explore this lots more as we go. So that's person-centered thinking. Person-centered planning is more of a methodology and a practice. And it's a way of organizing any services and supports to support a person to live their best life. And it's directed by the person or the young person and their loved ones and their family and caregivers and anyone else that is relevant for that person. Finally, person-centered practices are more of a system level concept. And this is how do we align services and supports and policies and how we pay for things and how we monitor things and how we measure things. How do we align all of that to fit a person-centered orientation? So a lot of the work that we do at NCAPPS is figuring out how we change systems from being system-centered, which is what systems usually are, and these are the systems that we've sort of inherited, to being person-centered. All right, next slide, please. So a bit more about person-centered planning. We did an environmental scan early on where we really looked through the literature including family-centered care and family-centered planning literature. And we really identified 4 components of person-centered planning. The first is the person is at the center of the plan. The child and the caregivers are at the center of the plan. Another foundational principle is around choice and self-determination. So there should be maximum opportunities for people and their loved ones to have a choice in the services that they get. And self-determination, exercising your choice, making decisions as a person, as a family, that is essential for well-being. And so even when somebody's decision-making capacity is impaired in some way, we're always looking to maximize that decision-making capacity as much as possible, meeting the person where they're at. A third foundational principle of person-centered planning is community inclusion. People want to live in their community. They want to be treated with dignity and respect. Most people, most of the time, do not want to be in institutions outside of community. They want to be living their lives amongst their peers in the communities that they choose. And then finally, a foundational principle of person-centered planning is that there has to be services and supports to choose from. So you can have all the choice in the world, but if there's only one clinic that's going to be available to provide service to your young person, then you're not able to really exercise choice and self-determination. So those are foundational principles I wanted to make sure we had a sense of. Next slide, please. So how are we thinking about person-centered practices? How are we thinking about person-centered systems? So traditionally, and this will probably be familiar to those of you who've received services in the system, the idea of access to a system is all based around what is your diagnosis? What are your deficits? What are your functioning deficits? What are your limitations? That's sort of like, those are the questions that we're asked as soon as we knock on the door of a system to get services for ourselves or for our kiddo. When we have that sort of negative, that system focus, we are interested in what can people get eligible for, and you get eligible for stuff by demonstrating impairment. That leads to an emphasis on problems, I would say an overemphasis on problems. And another aspect of a system-centered system is that you kind of get what you get. And all of the forms that you have to fill out and all of the rules that you have to follow and all of the structures that are in place are really for the convenience of the people providing the services, and not really to promote like the centrality of the kid or of the person. In a person-centered system, by contrast, folks have a lot of choice about what they get, when they get it, where they get it. There is a focus on strengths. We don't ignore if people have challenges and are struggling, but we also look at what they can do and what they can contribute. And we see people and their families as individuals, and that means understanding and getting curious about what are their cultures, what are their values around treatment, what do they want, what are their preferences, and those are reflected in the supports that they get. So Ebony had something to say about this idea, so I will cue that video up. All right. Here we go.
Some different perspectives when it comes to person-centered practices and systems. And for myself, I have had both positive and negative experiences. Some negative experiences was just the fact of always having these low expectations based off of my diagnosis. I'll never be able to have good relationships, hold down a job for a long period of time. I'd only be able to leave the house once a week for dialectical behavioral therapy. And for a long time, I believed that. For years, I believed that. so much that I didn't work for a while because how could I? And it took some choices or even just being exposed to the fact that I had these choices to have dignity of risk, to learn from my own mistakes and make my own choices via my own inner wisdom. It wasn't until I was able and encouraged and supported to explore those things that these practices and systems shifted from negative to positive. Being made to feel like I could only do so much and it would be so harmful to myself and the world if I were to try anything different was limiting in itself and made me even more depressed and not motivated in ways that I didn't even realize at that time because I believed it was a limitation. When I was exposed to more choices and options, ways of ruling out things or ruling them in, that allowed me more autonomy and even clarity when it came to being able to name what would or and wouldn't work for me. And so I really needed that ability to do that. And when I did, I had more positive experiences. Another challenge that I think there is with these supports is that when they can work well, and that's great. But then that progress is also seen as a reason that the person doesn't need these supports anymore and can even make them ineligible for these supports. And that's how folks regress. That's how folks return to the same situation or to what's familiar to them, whether that's the hospital or risky behavior. Whatever you can think of, there are so many different things that can lead someone back to where they started. And some of that can do with the fact that if they make too much progress, they're no longer eligible for the supports that they need. When my daughter was diagnosed with autism, we were told of all the things that she couldn't do. And I didn't want to believe that. And so I tried all these different and alternative things, as well as traditional things, to keep pushing and moving her forward. And she progressed in ways that I didn't even know were possible based off of what I was told. And then when she did, we were told she didn't need services anymore. She was even taken off of her IEP because she was doing so well. She was so high functioning. And this totally took away from all the work and stuff that we had done and that we continue to do for her to be able to present that way. And that made it hard to shift. It also made it hard to describe or even want to be honest about said progress, because then the consequence of that would be loss of resources, loss of supports, and even loss of financial benefit, which was needed.
All right, so that is a bit from Ebony. I'm glad she's able to chime in. As you can see, it's nice that she's able to kind of contribute her perspective. Emily, would love to hear your thoughts on this kind of person-centered, system-centered concept as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that I resonated quite a bit with what Ebony shared, and I enjoy that it feels like she's right there with us on this live. So from my own perspective, very similar to Ebony, it's really positive when your child, for us, it's we have a couple of children and one specifically that I'll reference frequently today. But we're kind of in a season where we're experiencing a lot of growth and a lot of success with some of the coping strategies and tools that different supports have like helped put in her toolbox. And this has taken a long time, a lot of years of supports. And it should be a time where a parent gets to look at their child and be like filled with joy and excitement. And in our situation, we haven't felt like we've gotten to spend a lot of time in that joy because we realize that with that success often comes the loss of the services helping to support that and nothing substantial to replace it. I have sat in meetings fearful that if I talk too positively about the progress, that we're going to lose that service. With many disabilities, of course, not all, but in situations like ours, we're often working towards interdependence rather than full independence with our children. And this means that for our daughter specifically, she's going to need some form of external brain support to help her co-regulate throughout her life. And instead of feeling excited about that progress, we often feel that we have to focus on the impairment to advocate for the continued supports and just to help our child maintain that success and then further grow with the right supports in place. And in thinking about this, I realize sometimes that before a service even starts, I'm already thinking about how and when we will lose it. And that's just really, really unfortunate. I did see a question in there, and I have about the ages of my children, and I have a 13, 10, 8, 7, and 1-year-old. So those are the ages of my kids.
Thanks so much, Emily. And Ebony, as you heard, Ebony has her own experience in the system as a young person, and also has a daughter who is now 19 years old, I believe. All right. So next slide, please. So what does a person-centered system look like? How do we get there? And Lachelle, you can go ahead and like put all of the, you can like click forward a little bit. There we go. So yeah, you can go ahead and put them all up on the slide. That's great. So in a person-centered system, and these are ways like, hopefully these spark ideas about, these are like kind of key changes and shifts that we have worked with systems to adjust. So this is, we know this from practice and from watching systems as they worked on reforms. In a person-centered system, people know what to expect. There's really clear information that is linguistically accessible, available in the language, in plain language, not like bureaucrat speak, but in just like plain, simple language about what to expect from how the services are going to, what you're going to be, how we just determine what you're eligible for, how we make arrangements for you to access services, what types of services you get, what it looks like when they end, all of those things. People know what to expect. The people who facilitate planning, and that's what we're going to talk about a lot in the next hour, are well qualified, they have good competencies, and they're well supported. They don't have a caseload of 100 to 1. If they're working with families with complex needs, they've got what they need to provide the support and the time that they need to provide support and facilitate plans. Systems are delivering services that are consistent with values, so that's strengths-based, so a social justice orientation. People with lived experience drive change at all levels of the system. One of the reasons that I'm so excited to know and work with Emily and Ebony is that they are both people with lived experience who are working within systems. Emily working for the state of North Dakota to really ensure that family voice is part of the system of care there. Ebony works for me at the Human Services Research Institute, conducting research, providing technical assistance, engaging with systems, using her lived experience intentionally. That's a person-centered way of doing things. And quality measures and data are used in person-centered ways. You can use data in non-person-centered ways, and you can use data in person-centered ways. And so we do things like measure people's experience, ask ourselves, are we delivering services that families value? How would we know that we're delivering services that families value? So that's just a bit more about person-centered systems. So now let me bring Ebony into the conversation and see what she has to say.
In a person-centered system, I'm going to focus more on the peer support part of it, where it talks about people with lived experience drive change at all levels of the system. As a person with lived experience in many different systems and who willingly discloses and shares a lot of my lived expertise, I do that because that's what's really helped me. There were periods of time when more traditional and clinical services were forced on me and things that I had to do that pushed me in a certain way. But it wasn't until I connected with folks who shared some of my life experiences that I was able to really connect and see and believe that I was beyond my limitations and my labels, because I was bearing witness to the proof and the evidence via these other peers that I was with who were sharing their trials, tribulations, and triumphs in the different ways that they were able to get to that. And through that, it made me want to do the same thing. That's why I got into really peer support services. And that's also how I also found more inner wisdom to help myself, was through that, helping others, bearing witness to that, and paying forward back what helped shift me and helped in my healing. And that was peer support. Another form of persons with lived experience in driving change could also be my daughter, as an example. She is now the facilitator of a youth peer group called Black Teens Talk, where online she helps other young adults and teens talk about and navigate moments of distress and celebrate moments of triumph. And I think that is so cool and even more needed in all areas, but especially with younger adults and younger folks, and especially neurodivergent folks. I keep saying especially everyone. But when you think of the global majority and those who are underseen and underserved, there are definitely some specific especiallys. And so keep those in mind and keep the things that I've shared in mind when it comes to connecting other folks or folks in general with each other who share similar lived experience, and see how that may help shift perspective and lens on one's own life limitations and capacity.
All right. Emily, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, I will touch on the perspective of lived experience driving change. And I think it's funny to look back. I shared that I'm fairly new to my role with the Behavioral Health Division in North Dakota. But, as a parent with children with complex needs, I essentially became a care coordinator. On top of just being a mom, you're navigating therapies, medical appointments, medication management, IEPs, and then just the symptoms associated with individual diagnoses. And then just complex relational challenges within family dynamics, chronic stress, things like that. And because this is my living experience, it's sort of become my passion. And when my husband saw the job description, he's been trying to search for a job that would fit and be, I didn't want to do anything that wasn't super that I wasn't passionate about. And when he saw this job, I typically would roll my eyes when I would get the emails. But to see a job description that said you were only qualified if you had lived experience, I can't even tell you what that felt like. I had never seen that a description of the sheer chaos that we live in actually qualified me for a professional role. And so it's not only given me I wouldn't say a platform, but just an opportunity to share with people at the policy level, like impacting systems in our state, that they can like hear like what that's actually like to navigate those systems, has been really exciting. And then actually we are in North Dakota, we're in the implementing stages of embedding parent and caregiver peer support into our human service centers, as well as into our private entities. And so I feel really excited to be a part of that process, and to not only, share my experience, but then bring other, other lived experience perspectives into that. And then like I get excited thinking about the other parents out there thinking that that like seeing those opportunities out there to make an impact and support families like theirs, like that is just such a great feeling. And so like I said, we're in the implementation stages of that. And so it's really cool to be a whole new perspective on systems, being at the system level. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I'm guessing it sounds like there's a good number of kind of family peers here with us today. So I imagine we're preaching to the choir a little bit around the value and power of peer support. But you really can't say it enough. And I've worked with the state of North Dakota for almost, let's see, going almost 10 years, providing technical assistance in various different ways. And it has been such a joy to see them develop positions like Emily's, and build out the peer support workforce and establish leadership positions within that state. And it's happening in states across the country, and it's just really exciting. Yeah. All right. So I'll spend a little bit of time on the next few slides. We might move through them a little bit quickly because they're a little drier than some of the other content, but the slides should be available to you if you want to refer back to them. I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that person-centered planning, good person-centered planning, not just service planning or treatment planning that we call person-centered, but actual person-centered planning, is a requirement for anyone who receives Medicaid-funded home and community-based services. So you can look in your state and see if your state has an HCBS waiver service. 14 states do have at least one HCBS program, including programs for youth and for children and youth. These types of waiver programs can provide peer support, wraparound, family support, in-home services, etc. Next slide, please. The home and community-based service requirements for Medicaid, which I'm going to cover in the next few slides, are also required for certified community behavioral health clinics, or CCBHCs. And CCBHCs are even more widespread than home and community-based services. They're operating in 46 states. There are more than 500. They're often public behavioral health, mental health, or substance use service clinics that get like a CCBHC designation. And there are specific criteria for certified community behavioral health clinics developed by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. But those clinics used the Medicaid requirements for person-centered planning as part of their criteria. So I wanted to make sure everybody knew. I'm subjecting you to all of these acronyms to make sure that everyone knows that a lot of service settings actually require person-centered planning, and their funding is contingent on those services. And the regulations for person-centered planning, which I'll kind of breeze through in the next couple of slides, are pretty good. Next slide, please. The requirements of a person-centered planning process are that they are led by the person, or in the context of a minor, led by the young person and their caregiver or guardians. The process should include people who are chosen by the person. It should provide clear information for the family so that they can make informed decisions. It should happen at places and times that are convenient for the family. They should have a choice in kind of where and when the meeting is held. The meetings and the process should reflect cultural considerations. So it should really take into account like what matters, what is the family's culture, and how does that translate into the services that they're going to find acceptable, the supports they're going to want. It should provide information in plain language. When there's disagreement or conflict, there should be strategies in place. It should be documented on an ongoing basis, not necessarily every 365 days or 180 days, but whenever the young person or the person's needs change or preferences change. Next slide, please. The requirements for the plan itself, and again, you can look at plans and see if these requirements are being met, should reflect that the person in the family chose the services that they're getting. It should reflect strengths and preferences, not just deficits. It should include goals that were identified by the person, by the young person, by the family, and not just by the service provider. It should incorporate services that might be provided by the system alongside supports that might occur naturally in the community, recognizing that folks aren't always going to necessarily use services. They're going to need to and want to find support that's naturally occurring in their community and not necessarily be connected to the system all of the time. Plans should be written in a clear way. They should have clear accountability built in. Who is responsible for ensuring that the service or support gets delivered? The person in the family should consent to the plan, so they need to indicate that they have consent, and they should have a copy of the plan. So I wanted to sort of run through these requirements just to, I guess, make sure folks know that, when you're supporting a family to create a person-centered plan, if it's called a person-centered plan, especially if it's if it's funded by Medicaid or being provided through a certified community behavioral health clinic, that there are funding requirements that the plan sort of meet these criteria. Next slide, please. All right, so if you are a payer, this is kind of a call to action. If you're a payer, if you represent an insurance company, hopefully you're paying attention to these. If you are an advocate in communities, talk to the CCBHC, talk to your to folks at the state and see, are you monitoring that these requirements are being met? And if you're a provider, think about whether the services that you're providing or the plans that you may be facilitating are in alignment with these values, whether or not you're funded by Medicaid or working within a CCBHC. Next slide, please. One of the resources that we are really proud of that we developed through NCAPPS is a guide to 5 competency domains for person-centered planning. If you can click towards the next slide, there it is. The 5 competency domains were developed by a group of us at NCAPPS, including folks with lived experience, by doing a pretty systematic review of best practice guides and training across a whole bunch of different models, including some family-centered care and wraparound models, and also person-centered planning trainings for adults in mental health systems, for adults and kids with intellectual developmental disabilities and aging systems, kind of across a number of different areas. We looked at what are the common competencies that someone who's facilitating the process, so a case manager, a support coordinator, maybe a provider, maybe a peer specialist, what are the types of competencies that they need to have for a plan and a planning process to be truly person-centered? And we arrived on 5 competency domains. And what we'll do for the rest of our time together is kind of walk through those competency domains. So let's go to the next slide. All right, and you can go ahead and page through these bullets here, these points. So the first domain is that the person facilitating a plan needs to have a good understanding of strengths, must practice kind of cultural humility and think about how culture informs a person's experience, and be focused on the whole person, the whole family. And really espouse a lot of those values that I talked about earlier. So we'll hear from Ebony again about her perspective on this first domain.
So now we're talking about strength-based, culturally informed, and whole person focus. And this is important because we are all unique and individual. Even if we look alike, even if we share some similarities, or we may even feel like they're the same things, how we're impacted by these things are different, how we're socialized are different. And so it's important to acknowledge the whole person and all of the pieces of them, even pieces that may not seem as important to you or as important to whatever you think their problem is. If it's important to them and it's helpful to them, then that is what matters. An example that I can give more on being more culturally informed would be just some of my experiences in different treatment settings and not seeing myself represented. Most times when I was in different settings, whether it be my therapeutic settings or even settings I was in with my daughter, it was very seldom that I seen myself represented in those spaces. And if I did, it was through gross similarities for me. And what I mean by that was it was because we were all from a certain area or with a certain label, that I saw more folks like me in certain spaces. But when it came to like my clinical dialectical behavioral classes or different social things that I would go to, even at the very beginning of peer support, I didn't see a lot of folks that looked like me for many different reasons. One very clear and impactful example would be while supporting my daughter, we were always suggested to go to social emotional groups. And so we did. But when I would go there, we'd be the only one like us there. I'm a Black woman, I'm a single mom, and she's an autistic girl. Autism is more traditionally diagnosed and more regularly diagnosed in boys. So her being a girl, that in itself was one thing. Me being a single parent where there were more two-family homes and white folks there were a lot of white dads there with their sons. And so me and my daughter didn't fit in those spaces. Definitely didn't feel comfortable enough to open up. And that may not have been so much about the environment that was set as far as like all of the things that we needed to be there. But it was definitely hard to open up and disclose when I'm the only one that looks like me. And therefore, I'm feeling as though I'm the only one that would be naming my unique experiences. And so that right there is a grave disconnect and forced me to seek even more alternative supports, resources, and community.
Oh, there's a little cameo from baby Draco, the dog. Emily would love to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah. I just wanted to point out, I'm sharing a little bit about one child specifically, but she is okay with me sharing. So I just wanted to say that. So one example that we've seen that's done really well is we have had the privilege of working with a really great trauma and attachment therapist. And at the beginning of that process, we really focused on helping our daughter understand her story and strengthening the attachment between her and I specifically. And we've made significant progress in this area. And continues to help her kind of navigate complex emotions. We have a lot of automatic negative thoughts. And then just as we're getting a little bit older, kind of piecing together what her personal goals are now that she is, approaching teenage years, and we're not so much stuck in the like parenting of toddlers and young children. We're raising her to be an adult. And so we've just had the privilege of having that this done really well to include her in what her goals are. And so common symptoms of her diagnosis can make achieving some of those goals that she wants to achieve more challenging, which can be really angering for her and discouraging for my husband and I. But having a therapist who involves all of us in that work together and creates an environment where we can actively practice, and it helps create buy-in for her participation. And she's been able to meet a lot of her personal goals because of that approach. And that gives us hope for her future. So I'm really thankful for that. I know that that's not always the case, but that's a win right there.
Thanks, Emily. And I think your kind of story is a great example of how not only is sort of a person-centered orientation like the right thing to do from a values perspective, it's also more effective. Because when people are feeling seen and heard, and when kids are experiencing successes and using their strengths, they do better. They get better. And Ebony, similar, I think, kind of similar reflections. It's a waste of system, time, and resources to force someone to go into a group where they're not going to speak up and they're not going to get any benefit from that. That's not a good use of, the taxpayer dollars that are funding the service, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not just about this being the right thing to do. And a lot of times when it's done right, and when we align systems correctly, they work better and they're more efficient as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so that's the first competency domain. The second competency domain is that practitioners who are supporting person-centered planning need to be able to cultivate connections inside the system and outside the system. They need to be fluent in what does the service system look like? How does it work? How do you tap into services? And ideally, they're also fluent in what's available outside of the service system. We know that families who are seeking support for a kiddo with a mental health related need are often also experiencing other kinds of challenges that may be economic, maybe accessing services in other ways, accessing services for themselves, for the caregiver themselves, for other kids. They are often, kids and families are often intersecting not just with the mental health system, but with the education system, maybe the child welfare system, maybe with the criminal legal system. And so those folks who are facilitating these person-centered plans need to be responsive to those different intersections, those different intersecting needs, and know about things like the free programs that are available at the library, or the programs that somebody might want to access within their faith community or within their cultural community, and really be skilled at sort of weaving together all of those different resources in a way that makes sense for the person to support them and the family to support them holistically. You need to have an understanding of, of diagnoses, sure, of disabilities, but but also of the systems and how they respond to those. And whenever possible, there needs to be that maximizing of connection to naturally occurring community supports. So we will hear from Ebony again. 1 second, sorry. All right. There.
So we want to try and cultivate connections both inside and outside of the system. As we've shared earlier, sometimes a lot of these plans and systems are focused on the limitations and the quote problems of the person, and not so much all the other great things that they can contribute and share. And sometimes those things are amplified outside of the system. And that's why there should be a combination of both. And so we want to help folks tap into their inner wisdom and make meaning of their experiences by sharing options. I'm so big on options. You want folks to have options, both clinical, non-clinical, traditional, non-traditional, alternatives, whatever they think of as well. Like, listen to them. We don't always have all the answers. We don't always have experience all of the things to even make some suggestions. And so hearing the person out and having them add to those options too can really help them with building a bridge. We want to be a bridge to folks to many options and the options that are appealing to them instead of a life raft. Sometimes we could tap into a situation where we feel as though we have all the answers, or because that's an expectation. And that can also drive disconnect, and it can also have us agenda based, whereas it's one-sided, whether that's in the system or outside of the system or anything. We can have an agenda and a bias based off of our experience. And so we want to create alternatives, whether we're familiar or not, whether we agree or not. What is going to help the person, you know? Take the time to listen to what connections they currently have and what that looks like for them. And how could you help facilitate that and amplify that? I also want to name too that partial participation is still participation. Even if someone may not seem like they're engaged, the fact that they're there is a big deal. There are so many reasons why may not be engaged. They could be activated. They could be exhausted. They could be over medicated. They could be overstimulated. You want to explore and again, rule things in and out. And you're only able to do that with trial and error and many different options, not just a few and not just the ones that you give to everyone. Listen to folks as they're the experts on their selves. And lastly, I'll just share that everyone should be afforded the dignity of risk and the right to make and learn from mistakes in real time and not as a consequence.
All right. Emily, over to you.
I just loved what she said about options. That was fantastic. I will share a great example of a way that we've been able to be connected to our community. So a couple of years ago, the school our daughter attended, with our consent, placed a referral to a new community mentorship program. And we were hesitant right away, but due to some of the significant emotional and behavioral challenges that she faced, and with the large size of our family and other complex needs, it was and it continues to be difficult to engage all of our children in our community in a safe and meaningful way. But I think because of I guess, knowledge in this area, like being connected to community and to resources and to supports, is really important to living a healthy, meaningful, like robust life. And so because of that referral, um, she's been able to participate and to be an active like participant in her own community. And during the past 4 years where she's been a part of that program, her mental health has ebbed and flowed during that time frame. But due to the nature of the one-on-one mentorship, the support is tailored exactly to what she needs. And in that, she's able to, it supports the work that we're doing in therapy to what are her personal goals and what are things that she wants to be involved in. And so we talk about this a lot in North Dakota, that there's often we need categorical services. They're super important, but it's a lot of times these this is a formal service, but it's like formally informal, to just creating opportunities for kids to just be kids, for people to just be people and be active participants in their community. So we're really grateful for that. And I wish that every family like ours could be involved in a service like that, so that they can have those opportunities.
I love that, formally informal. That's so cool. I'm going to use that, Emily. Thank you. Awesome. All right. Great. So a third domain, in person-centered planning. It is essential that rights, choice, and control are a focus, and the person facilitating the plan needs to be fluent in educating people about their rights, helping people to understand their rights, helping kids and families with a wide range of communication styles and cognitive abilities and communication preferences to understand in their own way, what services are available, and to communicate that back. Even folks with, a lot of challenges, maybe challenges making decisions that are safe, making decisions that, we would make, deserve to and have the capacity to make decisions. So person-centered planning is for everyone. Anyone and everyone can participate in a person-centered planning process. Folks just need different kinds of support to participate in that process. So that the fundamental premise is that this is for everyone. It doesn't matter what your limitations are, what your challenges are, how you communicate, whether you communicate using, spoken language. There's always a place for decision-making capacity. So that's really central, and you have to be really good at working with folks to maximize that decision-making capacity. Self-advocacy is central and incredibly important to a person-centered system. So people need to be kind of equipped with the support and supported to advocate for themselves, to advocate for what they need. And people should be aware of their legal protections. They should be aware of their fundamental rights to safety, to be free from abuse and neglect, to community inclusion, to receive services in the least restrictive environment in communities of their choosing. So facilitators need to have that kind of capacity. All right, I'm going to share one more video from Ebony for this segment. Right. Oh, excuse me. Try that again. Bear with me. Thanks.
All right. So, rights, choice, and control. This is important. Folks who are experiencing mental health challenges and struggles and challenges with substance use really struggle with this a lot. We're not informed totally and completely of our rights and choices. And that lack of information continues to amplify our lack of control and belief that we don't have any control, any choice, or any rights in our own life. I know what was helpful for me was learning about my personal rights, my human rights, not just my rights in all of these systems. Because quite frankly, even advocating for it, the processes alone can add to my own mental distress, you know? But knowing what my rights are just as a person walking this earth really helped me to find my voice and amplify my voice in these other areas when it came to the choices that I wanted to make and the things that I wanted to have control over. But I needed some help and I needed some information. And I also needed to be clear headed, which with different psychiatric drugs or medication, I was not able to do that. On paper, I am said to be totally physically and mentally disabled. And for a while, I believed that. I believed, as I've said before, in my limitations, in my challenges, and that I will always be these ways and no other way. And if I would have remained in that belief and mindset, I wouldn't be here in front of you all today. I would be over medicated on 10 plus drugs. I would be in intensive therapy and I'd be not as vocal or verbal or cheerful as I am today. And so I needed to choose my own path. But there were things that helped me to get to that. Folks not making assumptions about what I was capable of and not capable of really helped me with that. Empowering me, and even when I made a mistake or I was disappointed, not using that as a reason for me to stay on whatever plan or whatever drug that I was assigned to based off of my diagnoses. And then giving me the tools and the education that I needed, telling me different things to read, exposing me to different groups and alternative supports, um, celebrating with me the wins and not using that as a reason to take away things that I need to maintain that, you know. Also, sharing information to me about microaggressions was very important too. And it took a while, and that's not a level that everyone is at. But especially when you're in spaces with more cultural diversity and complexity, being aware of microaggressions and discrimination and things that can add to a person feeling not seen and heard is going to be helpful and create a connection. And it's also going to remind folks that we do have rights just for being here. We have a choice in everything, even when it may not feel like it. And when we are fueled, empowered with the knowledge of all of our rights and all of our choices, we can begin to feel as though we have control and we can be empowered to take said control.
I am so glad the tech worked so that Ebony could share this with you all. All right. All right, we can bring the slides back up. I just have a couple more slides to go through, and then we'll shift over to Q&A time. Two more domains. We won't spend a ton of time on these, but they're important, particularly if you're like a manager or somebody who's overseeing a program. The final two domains are a little more technical than the first three. The fourth domain is partnership, teamwork, and facilitation and coordination. Folks who are facilitating the person-centered planning process need to be skilled in keeping the focus on the person. In meetings, when the person is there, making sure that folks are not speaking about the person in third person, but rather speaking directly to the person, for example. Facilitating conflict resolution. when there are conflicts between, within the family, or between a provider and a caregiver, or anything else. Encouraging that everyone is making contributions to the planning process, that the loudest voices in the room aren't dominating the conversation, particularly when those loudest voices aren't the voice of the family of the person. And the next slide is our final competency domain. It's boring, but it's important, and it's documentation, implementation, quality monitoring. When we were talking about this with Ebony in the planning call, she was like, yeah, I don't really care about this domain, but I also understand that it's important. And that's fine. There needs to be strong, organized documentation so that everybody who's part of the plan has the plan, knows what's going on, and critically, so that the plan is seen as a living document that's revised as needed, not just on that schedule. It's not a checklist, that it's something dynamic. We're going to talk about that more later. And that this is a really important thing. One of our kind of wise ones in the person-centered planning world is named Michael Small. He's been doing consultation on person-centered planning for decades, and he says a person-centered plan that is not implemented is a form of violence. It is incredibly damaging to trust and to hopes when you sit down with a family and create a beautiful person-centered plan that is promptly ignored. There's no better way to erode a person's trust in that a system is going to help them and is going to help their family. That quote is from Michael Small, Smull, and he's got tons of resources I can share later. Some of them on our NCAPPS website around person-centered planning. He is a guru, yes. All right. So I think that kind of brings us to a close. I think I want to invite, real quick. This resource is available to you. It's also been translated into Spanish. That's on our website. And there's a plain language version on our website if you want to share it with folks who aren't necessarily interested in all the technical aspects, but just want to know. All of that is on our website. We'll make sure you have the links to all those documents. All right, so I just want to invite real quick Ebony and Emily to provide any closing thoughts. And Emily, I think I'll start with Ebony's last video, and then we'll go into, we should have a little bit of time for Q&A. All right, so here we go.
Hello again. I just wanted to say thank you all for your patience and your time. I really appreciate just being a part of this and that I'm able to be a part of it in this way. And how I want to end is not just by thanking you, but just in showing that what we're doing right now is an accommodation for myself. I needed to take care of some medical stuff that I had no control over and was last minute. And we were able to figure out a way so that I could still be present and share some of my wisdom and lived experience. And these are things that can be hard. I am someone with both invisible physical and mental disabilities. And that's hard for even me to navigate because I know that I don't look the way I may always feel. And I definitely don't share that because when I didn't have the best experiences. And so being able to be vulnerable to do that, having a team, not just my medical team, but my work team, that I can actually disclose that and have reasonable accommodations is another thing that is allowing me to work today and work in the way that I am, provide for my family, contribute to the world, and to continue my healing. And so even what we are doing right now is an example of how creative you can be when helping someone and centering them in person-centered practices and systems. I really want to thank you all for just being here, for taking the time to hear what myself and my colleagues have to say. I also want to thank my colleagues, Bevan and Emily, for your support and for making this happen. And I hope that I get to hear and see all the great feedback from this webinar.
All right. Emily, over to you.
I think I can pretty much just mimic what Ebony said. I appreciate everybody taking the time. I appreciate the invitation to share. And something that Ebony said reflected, I hadn't really thought about it, but in her description of how the accommodation for her to still be present. And that was one of the things when I was applying for this job was what's their plan to accommodate a family, a social worker who is living this experience right now. And it was kind of a litmus test, honestly, of are you going to do what you say you're going to do? And I'm really grateful that they did, and they heard that, and they have been able to make accommodations so I can be both a mom to complex kids and be a part of making systems change here in North Dakota. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much.
With you, Gail.
Well, I am enthralled. Emily, thank you so much, and Bevan too. Ebony was amazing. We'll certainly have to invite her back for a part 2 at some time. Please send our thanks. But we have lots and lots of questions here, and we have about 10 minutes, so it'll be great. One really big question. As you can tell, A, I'm old, but B, I have a very New England sense. So I know Michael from way, 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 way back when he was doing person-centeredness. And person-centeredness 20, 30 years ago was really big. You know, everybody had to learn it. It was written into service definitions. In the IDB world, it was really, you had to have it and you had to really believe in it and have authentic person-centeredness. Today, a participant speaks and says, the first formal PCP that was done 20 years ago on their child was really done by someone who believed in the concept, and it was a great person-centered plan. Currently, they seem to have gone away from that and away from the emphasis of really writing authentic person-centered plans. Is there a way now to hold agencies and states' feet to the fire to make PCP more than a check in the box? And how do we do that?
Yeah. Great question. Thank you for the question. I feel like I spend so much time. It's well spent time, but I spend so much time when I'm speaking, particularly when I'm speaking with folks with lived experience and providers who really like are solid in these values. I spend so much time processing through the fact that the word person-centered plan is so overused, to the point where sometimes it can feel insulting. You know, there are so many people who have gotten a person-centered plan that was never implemented and they've lost total faith. Sometimes we talk about, like, should we change our name? Should we stop using person-centered? Should we use a different word? But until we change systems to stop doing this, whatever word we use is going to get defiled in the same way the word person-centered has gotten defiled. So what we are doing at NCAPPS, and we've got a ton of resources, are really providing tools for people in systems and people outside of systems, providing pressure to change, advocates or people who want reformers from within, to really pin down, what are we talking about? You call this a person-centered plan, but it's not a person-centered plan. If it were person-centered, it would look like X, Y, and Z, very specific things. And so we've created a lot of resources that hopefully do that. One of them, I'll drop in a chat, is called Promising Practices for Person-Centered Plans. This was written by my NCAPPS co-director, Sashka Rachevich, and another wonderful colleague, Kate Brady, that really kind of pulls together some practical guidance. the 5 competency domains, I think, are a way of really saying, like, are the people facilitating the plans practicing these competencies? We've worked with North Dakota to create some measures for those competencies, and like a guide for how to measure them, which I hope we'll make public. That's not public yet, but hopefully we're making a public facing version soon. We have also created a person-centered practices self-assessment that's like a system level tool that's designed to break down like policies and practices within a system, and measure them on like a 1 to 5 scale of how person-centered they are, with very specific descriptions. And all of those materials were really developed with the input and the wisdom of our wonderful gurus, like Michael Small and others, and also critically, folks with lived experience.
Always with lived experience. And I think the example, and we said person-centered planning is social justice. The greatest example is what we just presented here, and how you lifted Ebony up by accommodating her to take care of herself and recording. What a great example that was. The next question is, are these peer supporters certified as peer supports, or are they the CCBHC style peer supports, and are they reimbursed differently?
So I can speak just like from a national perspective. Typically, my understanding in the states that I've worked with is within a certified community behavioral health clinic, or if there's peer support being provided, like home and community-based services, those are typically provided by peers that are certified with whatever the state certification program is. So most, if not all states by now, have a state peer specialist certification program or programs. Some states certify mental health and addiction peers separately. And those would be the peer specialists that would be working within the certified community behavioral health clinics. And I don't know, Emily, if you have any kind of thoughts on what it looks like in North Dakota specifically.
Not at this point.
Well, I do know that there are peer supports, and we kind of think of when the National Federation of Families and NASTAC talks, we have peer supports in our mind. That's peer supports as adult recovery specialists that work adult to adult, individual to an individual. We also, the National Federation of Families and NASTAC really specializes in the family peer support, which means parent to parent, caregiver to caregiver, sibling to sibling. So family member to family member who is caring for the individual. So when I talk about family peer supports, there are a couple of different ways. Yes, it's directly in the service definition as a family peer support in about 35 states, but some states actually have a little variance of it as a family peer support in the high fidelity wraparound, or a family peer support in the CCBHC. What's authentic? Well, I encourage you to go to the National Federation of Families website and look up what a family peer specialist should be doing. If you have lived experience and you're caring for a family member, you're a family member eligible to be a family peer specialist, in fact. I wanted to ask, is strength-based just an alternative lens to deficit-based? I see value in goal-based interventions or solution-focused therapy. Why not focus on what the client, an individual, thinks will help instead of their strengths and deficits? Ooh, this is a big question. Can we help our families out of crisis through practical goals they define? And Dawn, if you're still here, if you want to put your mic on and follow up with that question if necessary, I welcome you to do that. Who would like to answer that?
It seems like sometimes people throw around strength-based and they don't. Anyway, some articles I've read, it's not really evidence-based. It's more like a fad. And it's kind of written into things now. So it's written into our policies too, but I focus more on what works, what's effective for the family, what they want to do, accomplish as a family peer support. I don't know. I just wanted to know if anyone had any thoughts on that.
Devin?
Hi, this is Sonia Hartman. I'm in Austin, Texas, and we utilize the wraparound process to provide services to families, and we use strength-based, but it's more about helping the family to identify their strengths, build off of those strengths. So you're creating goals, or you're creating their plan based off of things that they identify are strengths, but the strengths are also utilized when we're developing crisis plans or plans for the youth to implement if they feel themselves to incorporate some interventions that are typically things that family do on a natural basis, but they don't see it as that. So it's not just saying we're going to ignore that this kid or this family may have some challenges here or whatever. So it's not focusing on the negative, but it's focusing, and it's actually turning that thought that people may have that they may consider as negative into a positive. And how do you reverse that? How do you look at things differently? So you're still addressing the same behavior, just not pinpointing it as, oh, this kid is doing this, and that wrong. And I say kid because that's predominantly what we work with. But it's more about, where do their strengths lie? What are they actually expressing in some of the behaviors that they may exhibit, which gets them to the attention of people and of systems. Usually if a kid is sitting still in a classroom and not bothering anybody, they normally are not going to get referred to some of the programs because they seem to be doing okay.
No.
I put up quotes. I'm sorry, you probably can't even see my quotes, my air quotes. So it's
Well,
really focusing on what the family identifies as their strengths, but also looking at where the kid identifies those strengths, and then turning some of those things that they may see as negative, or even family members. I've worked with families that can't even say one positive thing about their kiddo, and really turning that around and getting them to look at things differently.
well, Sonia, I'm going to let the last word be yours. Thank you for answering that. And I hope this was really an informative and helpful event. I want to thank Bevan Croft, Ebony Flint, and Emily Barr again for today, and thank everyone for your participation. As always, a special thanks to Dr. Linda Goggin, the Executive Director of the National Federation of Families and NASTAC's Principal Investigator, and of course the NASTAC team for helping us run today's event smoothly. Next month is going to be equally informative, same time, same channel pretty much. It's the third Wednesday at 2:00. And we're going to have a great presentation with Paul Schmitz for Introduction to Collective Impact. How can we use the tools of collective impact to further the family peer movement? I encourage you all to attend, and this should be very, very good. So please join us. And as you're sitting today, you can either take the screenshot of that QR code or follow the link to a survey, or best yet, as you exit today, you'll be brought to the survey. You can fill it out. And once you fill out that survey, you will be brought to another page where you can download your certificate of participation. It's a lot easier for you to leave me than for me to shut this off. So I hope you enjoyed today, and I'll keep it up for about 4 more minutes as you all leave. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate you all. Kristen, you can exit and you should be brought to the survey yourself.
Thank you, Gail.
You're welcome.
It's Irma.
Oh, knew you were there.
I'm here.
I'm going to give you an award for being our most frequent attendee.
Okay.
Irma, you going to the conference this year?
I am actually not going to be there, but I have 3 of my staff coming.
Well, you tell them to stop by the exhibited table and say, hi, Irma sent me. And
Okay, I
I'll
will.
set them up.
I will. I will do that. I earned a cruise on Mary Kay.
Oh my
So,
goodness, that's
yeah,
fabulous.
yeah.
And for
So,
folks,
it
yeah,
just happened. It's the same time.
but it's a cruise is wonderful. But if you can't
Yeah,
go to a cruise, everyone, the National Federation of Families will have their conference in Orlando, Florida, the week of
I
November 7th.
know. I know. And I'm so upset because that Hyatt Regency is the bomb.com.
Well,
Oh
that's
my
great to
gosh.
tell everyone here. And we do have discount tickets for Disney available.
Oh, please go. The hotel and the conference, you're going to have the time of your life.
Yes.
It is so beautiful. Yes, it is. Okay, let me do
Spoken
my
as our
survey.
marketing representative. Yes, please attend the National Federation of Conference. It happens once a year, our annual, and it's our birthday this year. So we totally encourage you. We're going to have special surprises and a party on the Saturday. Orlando, Florida is beautiful this time of the year. So please exit on your own and go to the website and fill out our survey. We need to tell SAMHSA how we're doing and also how we can improve. So we appreciate you filling out that survey as you exit. We will be closing the Zoom in 1 minute. And after that, you'll have to either use the QR code or the survey link to fill out the survey and get your certification, your certificate of attendance. This Zoom will be shutting down in 1 minute. If you cannot see the code, when you exit here, when you exit the Zoom, you should be taken right to the same place the code would take you. It'll take you right to the survey. So if you leave now before I shut it off, you'll be able to get there without the code. Last chance to leave on your own so you can fill out the survey and it's easier that way. I will be shutting this Zoom off in 30 seconds.